content available in YouTube as well.
Okay.
Right.
Let's start.
So again, hello everyone. We continue our session with about the Azure Governance series, and today we're talking about the identity-based one. So what we covered so far, and it is already in our YouTube channel, we covered the cost management discipline and the security discipline. So this would be our third session. Until the summer, we'll be able to cover resource consistency and also deployment acceleration, part of the Azure governance. So what we'll be talking today, as usual, we'll go about the latest updates from Microsoft Cloud Services, which this time are, I would say, pretty much nice updates.
Yeah, nothing special. Again, a lot of AI stuff and well,
but not only.
Kind of random this time.
Yeah. And then we'll focus in our main topic about the identity baseline. So my name is Nikolai Markov. I've been in the IT sphere for almost 20 years. My main focus is helping large organizations transform their way of doing business by adopting the cloud and AI technologies. And I'm happy what I'm doing.
Okay. Kind of a similar role. I do a lot of M365/Azure work, so happy to share my experience.
Okay, starting with what's new. In Azure World, we'll see some new stuff in the Azure Web Apps. Also, there's a new storage tier recently introduced. Pretty nice addition to, I would say, very famous feature, which is hot patch for Windows Server and wonk waiting private app gateway.
Okay. From the previous session, we had information about the M365 Copilot, updated the most recent information from there that actually showed up yesterday. And Copilot and SharePoint would be another topic from this domain. Just a random thing that I saw, which I feel it will be useful for people who are creating Power Apps and Power Automate flows, the ability to insert comments, especially if you have shared flows. It's particularly useful. And just, again, a few random mentions about security. It's been a while since a security vendor covered new vulnerabilities in Azure, so we'll just go briefly through the ones that were announced recently, as well as features that are coming directly with the E5 EMS suite of licensing, the app governance feature, as well as the ability to scan for internet-facing devices using the endpoint, Defender for Endpoint.
Cool. So let's get started. The first update, as I mentioned, is for Azure Web Apps, part of the App Services suite. It's called automatic scaling. So as we know, we already had the possibility to configure the scaling either manually or based on some specific metrics. This time, Microsoft provides us the ability to configure automatic scale, which is similar to the previous option which we have, which is based on some specific metrics. However, this time is based on incoming HTTP requests. The main and the most important thing is that we would, in the previous option, our app service plan was scaled it based on the for example, if we have 3 different apps, web apps or app services on the same app service plan, it will scale based on the trigger of any of these, and the app service plan will scale. So with this feature, actually, the web apps within the same app service plan will scale differently and independently of each other. So and when we don't want to scale based on specific CPU or whatever, to configure some advanced stuff, this is very easy way to get started. So keep in mind that Azure Functions are not supported. So at the moment you can use it with Azure Web Apps, but yeah, I guess this is down the path, especially the Azure Function Premium. The other newly introduced storage tier is called Azure Cold Storage, which is somehow between the KU and Archive tier. It is, I would consider it more closer to KU because it still provides a millisecond of latency, but at the same time is 4 times cheaper than KU for storing data, but it's 3 times more expensive. And also the minimum retention duration is 90 days. So for KU was 30, and for Archive, I think it was 180.
180, yes.
Yeah, but I would say it's a great addition, and I expect that a lot of organization will benefit from it, as it is 4 times cheaper. So keep in mind that there's since it's in just public preview, there's some limitations. So for example, you don't have point-in-time restore, you can't configure object replication natively into Portal. Of course, you can use some custom methods.
I wonder why object replication is not compatible.
To be honest, okay, this is a bit off topic, but recently we found out that there is no SLA for object replication, which is very, how to say, big challenge, let's say, for the organization to adopt it. And many organizations prefer to have a different method of replicating the data between the blobs, since Microsoft can't confirm any commitment of how much time will take, etc., for the object to be replicated to other blobs. So important thing is that you can set the cold tier by using AZ copy, and the change feed is not compatible yet. But again, I expect this to become pretty usable additional tier. So hot patch and desktop experience, I think we discussed in one of the previous sessions the introduction of hot patching. It was so far it was available only for Windows Server Azure Edition, and it was server core. Since that, to be honest, I've seen a lot of organization adopted it. The feedback so far from the customers are very good, and maybe that's the reason why Microsoft moved forward with that. And at the moment we have Windows Server, again Azure Edition, but this time with desktop experience, which also can benefit from the hot patching. What we discussed with Microsoft team is that they plan to have this feature available for all Windows Server versions, not only Azure editions. Again, this is pretty, how to say, one of the biggest benefits of running Windows Server in Azure. It's It's really saving a lot of time for customers which are using Windows Server virtual machines hosting their workloads. Sometimes the majority of the clients' downtime is
Because of
the patching. And as you can imagine, this saves significant time.
And you have to orchestrate it, you have to manage it.
Yes.
Somebody has to be assigned, or you have to have complicated scripts, or SCCM, or endpoint manager. Or...
It's the automated accounts. Usually it's not, I mean, it's manageable, especially when you're using multiple virtual machines and scale sets. But it's still, it's much easier. Actually, our latest implementation was a combination of hot patching and the usage of regular automation account for patches, which still require reboot, etc.
For the middleware, or not for the Windows updates?
For the Windows updates.
Okay.
For the Windows. Okay. And private app gateway. I don't know. This feature was. I mean, maybe it was very hard for. So I guess the backbone, Microsoft networking backbone, is very complex, and for sure it's require a lot of time for this to happen. But I would say we've been waiting very, very, very long time for this to come. Finally, it's here. So in short, we can have private app gateway. We don't have to configure any public IP this time, even that.
And securing it.
And securing it. Yeah. And
putting a firewall in front of it.
We don't need it anymore. We can, when we need internal app gateway, we can use it. It's still in preview. But yeah, and by the way, in order to enable all the preview feature, you have to go in the preview feature in the portal for all of these that we discussed. Yeah, I don't think that I shall go in details how to enable and configure this. It's a very popular service. So, and it's to be honest, pretty straightforward. Okay.
So on the M365 front, we're continuing the updates on the AI stuff that's currently being implemented in all of their products, especially the ones that involve collaboration and kind of be much more useful since users are directly interacting with it compared to infrastructure. So yesterday they've announced that this is going out of the preview that was, I mean, it was a completely closed out preview just to 20 clients. Microsoft probably picked out specifically, and they're expanding this to be now a paid preview to more than 600 clients. This would be available too. And they've announced the early access program where you can try and sign up, see if they will approve it and give you the opportunity to test this out.
And you have to pay for that?
Yes, it's a paid public preview. I mean that they're obviously trying to get a lot of money out of AI, the AI investment, and since everybody's keen on kind of getting on this train as early as possible, they're probably prepared to pay for this kind of stuff. I mean, if this was for if you needed to pay for the preview of the application gateway, probably you would wait for the GA. But if it's for AI, it's completely different. So you can go into the actual page for this announcement, the Microsoft 365 team block. You will see much more information, but in a nutshell, in the next few slides, we're just going to see what different implementations we have. So the semantic index, as they call it, is a way for the AI service to figure out specifics when searching the information. So imagine if you're looking for a file, you want to extract information, and in the lower preview screen, I'm not sure how big it is for you to see it, but if you open up the site, you can expand this picture as well. You will see how the AI actually is looking for information for a file based on who is part of your team, who recently created a file, and it assumes many key areas based on your question to come up with the right information for that to be presented. In this case, it's Microsoft Teams. As well as Copilot for Whiteboard. You can create instantaneous sticky notes based on the task at hand. So if you want to do a project and you tell what the project is, it can give you a draft of the different assignments that will be part of this project. So if we move on to the next one, we have similar implementations with PowerPoint and Outlook. For PowerPoint, it has integration directly with DALL-E. So if you want to add visualizations to your presentations, like everybody's been there looking for a GIF file or a JPEG file out on the internet to put on a presentation. Well, here you have direct access to their image AI engine to generate appropriate images for your presentation and put them directly in the file without going outside of PowerPoint. For Outlook, if you remember, we were discussing previously how Outlook you were able to draft messages, but they are going even further with making much more smart assumptions when you're responding to specific questions. I think this typically will be great for organizations where they have a front desk or people that are not well versed in the specific language. You can come back with very professional written responses to emails directly with this feature in Outlook. So I mean, AI is basically taking over the conversation within which people are gonna have, which will be strange because at some point you may not even know who's responding, an AI generated answer or the actual person that's behind the email message. But messages will probably get a lot more complicated and much more professional when using the Copilot feature. And on the next one, we have one for OneNote and the Microsoft Loop component. We've talked about Loop before. It's a way to implement interactive, based on the Fluid framework, interactive messages and different components that will make your static messages, like in Teams or in Outlook, active, so you can respond to them directly. If you remember, we did some presentations around how this you can create simple tables or questionnaires just with a click of a button, where here Copilot can create these for you based on prompts or from other information that you have on the email side or within a conversation in Teams. For OneNote, you can create professional text or you know, sort of a website kind of a generated template. If you're just starting out and if you want to create a draft of a text within OneNote, or if you're working on a common project, especially within the marketing space or just creating materials that involve creativity in terms of text, the Copilot in OneNote can help you create this in seconds. So yeah, it's getting everywhere pretty much. So it's really exciting times. I think the M365 Copilot would be one of the most beneficial features from all of the AI implementations that Microsoft is doing. I personally, I cannot wait to get my hands on these, especially when doing presentations. This will save so much time. For the email side, maybe not that much because I'm careful with how we respond. But if you're a front desk or a service desk, the Outlook part will definitely be helpful. If you have to go through many emails.
I thought to say so. You want to say that the guys from the front desk are not responsible for how they respond?
I mean, no, I think generally they have so much load that they don't have enough time to.
That's true.
They usually have templates that they copy over from different places, and instead of receiving the same templated answer, this can actually take into account many different variables as part of the initial request. So this would make the interaction much better for the person who's using these services, like the requester in this case.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, to be honest, I am also a big OneNote user, using it like day-to-day basis. So
usually we copy and paste from websites into OneNote, where here
taking screenshots, etc.
When you're creating ideas, people use OneNote a lot for when they're starting up something that they want to have a draft. They don't want to do it in Word. They want to do it or a whiteboard. They just want to scribble something up to get them started. Well, this would be a very good starting point. So, and like in Word, if you want to create a final copy of a document, this will also be useful. So comments in Power Automate and Flow, aka Power Automate and Power Apps. Microsoft is announcing and integrating the ability to do comments. If you're working on, usually in the Power Platform, you have multiple developers working on the same project, like a Power App or a Flow or automation or a virtual agent. And there are already ways to annotate the different components, like in Power Automate, you can kind of make up the language, but usually you don't have a way to define why did you do something like this. And similarly, like you would if you're using Visual Studio or any other IDE, you usually put comments in why you added this script block in the first place. What was the initial idea behind this? And adding comments in will make the review process from another person much more easier, instead of just trying to figure out and reverse engineering everything that has been done the way it was done. So I think it's a useful feature. That's why I've added into the sort of a practical thing, more or less.
Tim? And yeah.
For the Azure vulnerabilities, we have actually Nikki found this out. I didn't see it on time. There are a couple of vulnerabilities that were discovered by an independent company called Airmetic Research. There's so many security vulnerability specialists that are trying to get into Azure as
it's the most popular.
Yeah.
At the end.
There are different incentives for doing so. Like there is an active bug bounty program within Azure, like many.
And also promoting finding vulnerabilities, also promoting your current products. By the way, recently I noticed in LinkedIn, it was very trending diagrams of the different vendors, some pretty nice visualization of the different vendors and the amount of vulnerabilities found there. So of course, Microsoft was leading this competition, if I can say that way. There were a lot of comment mentioning that how it's possible Microsoft to be named as security leader in multiple directions and at the same time to have so much vulnerabilities. To me, honestly, that's perfectly makes sense because at the end, Microsoft is the biggest vendor providing like operating system, different softwares. So it's perfectly makes sense to me to be the most attractive for the.
And even if, and also the, you know, that these are people actually, or supposedly they're on the good side. There are a lot of people on the kind of the more shady part of the business where they actively try to exploit Azure to actually sell these vulnerabilities or exploit them to either extort companies or take over information, make it public on the internet. So this will be an ongoing effort. I mean, this kind of a business is shifting from on-premise services to the cloud, and as services get more complex, especially in Azure, with all the integrations between the different kind of independent services, vulnerabilities, more and more vulnerabilities will show up. And the real problem is usually in an on-premise environment, if you breach the environment, you're breaching only that company. But this cloud provider level of vulnerability, you probably you'll be able to access much more than just one client, depending on what it is.
Tenancy. At the same time, even I'm really sorry because I forgot to include it in the dates, but last month there were some kind of competition. It's very popular competition between the web application firewall vendors. And actually Microsoft WAF was in the first places, much better than vendors like F5, like Cloudflare. I think that there was some competition only with Imperva, but it's still even that there's some vulnerabilities found. We truly believe that Microsoft is a security leader.
Yeah. So in this case, they try to exploit the Azure API management service, which is a service that tries to, I mean, technically in a cloud, you would have multiple APIs depending on how many services you use. Some of them are custom, or you would develop them on your own based on applications. You have kind of built-in APIs. So with the API management service, you're trying to kind of structure this and centralize the management of using APIs. And this is an impressive article. If you go online, you can read kind of the full the full details of what steps they've taken, how they decided to do what. At the core of it is the so-called server-side request forgery, which is a way to use an existing vulnerable service to direct requests to other services and get information that you're not supposed to. Basically, you're using the identity of one service to impersonate to another. And depending on the different vulnerabilities, they were able to traverse local file systems or even uncover hidden ports, which were supposed to be blocked. But during their discovery process, they found that they can actually redirect the request and get to internal APIs, which are not available to end customers. So this is usually the holy grail, because once you get into the internals, like previously, I think we shown one of the vulnerabilities actually, people were able to get to database endpoints which are not part of their tenant with full privileges. So this is this is something that will, thankfully they went back to Microsoft and it was fixed afterwards. So hopefully nobody was able to exploit this. But yes, it's this will be an ongoing effort, and I think companies who do these kind of vulnerability assessments and kind of break-ins into the cloud will have a lot of benefit, not only from the bug bounty program, but Microsoft actively tries to associate and work with these vendors.
And based on examples like this, they working very hard in order to build the awareness and the importance of having layer difference zero trust model. So as you mentioned, if you're able to get inside the organization, you should still have some challenges by using microsegmentation.
There's also
time access. So
yeah, and there's also a very, I mean, not very, but a lot of bigger companies are actually thinking about leveraging their own managed keys to further encrypt the information that they have in the cloud. So technically, in an event like this, even if they're able to get to your information, it will still be encrypted with the keys that you own and not Microsoft. So it will not be usable. So investing in this kind of strategy is also something that you can do as a company. It's just a matter of
trade-offs.
Yeah.
It's important.
How many services support it? I think there was an announcement. I didn't put it on the slides, but there was an announcement for Power Automate where you can use customer managed keys. So to encrypt the information in Flow.
To be honest, I'm a big fan of Microsoft Managed Keys because at the end they simplify a lot of the work. And I would say that if you don't have any compliance requirements, like compliance standard, I believe that if you put more effort of using the other, methods of securing
managed identity, private endpoints.
As I think we discussed on the previous session of the security, Azure Firewall. I've had recently conversation why we should use Azure Firewall since it has a lot of overlap with App Gateway with WAF. It's for situation like this, it's definitely can help. You can have Azure Firewall to expecting the traffic even. It's a best practice. Microsoft recommend to go through Azure Firewall even with the communication with your PaaS services. For example, if you have Azure SQL with private endpoint in front of it, it would be better to go to redirect this traffic first to the firewall and then to the private endpoint with the database. So again, it really depends on your need, but I believe that if you carefully build your security strategy based on the defense in depth and layer defense and zero trust model, you should be well covered, and the majority of unknown vulnerabilities that we've been discussing through this and last year will not be able to affect you.
Okay, moving on. The app governance feature is coming to E5 security. I mean, technically, the licensing is very important when you're figuring out your strategy because this is how you know what services you're getting. And with all of the talks around security, Microsoft decided they want to include this as something that was previously an add-on that you needed to pay for, but now it's part of the E5 security suite, the so-called EMS.
By the way, is there companies that are not using E5 at the moment? I think in the past it was Dilemma, but right now I think it's like E5 becoming like a medium, not E3, right? What do you think?
I think it's it really depends on the size and how much services they're bundling together. The reason why we are usually buying E5 is because it makes sense, because it's cheaper based on the number of services that you're getting. It's more expensive than E3, but if you feel if you have the capacity to leverage the extended capabilities in E5, things like I mean, it's all over the place. Microsoft Teams telephony, or the Plan tool in Azure AD, or this kind of a thing. You would pick E5. There are, I heard of talks, and it's probably, I mean, since there are rumors, they're probably going to be announcing this as well. E7 is coming.
Oh, I guess it will include the premium teams.
So I think they'll probably spin out some of the stuff that's currently an add-on, like Teams Premium and others, and it will be included as E7. That's how they came up with E5 previously.
I guess a lot of the AI nice stuff would be in
Yeah,
E7 as
yeah,
well.
probably, yeah.
Okay.
So Microsoft has a very good strategy of kind of entangling customers and making sure they don't go anywhere, and making sure they will pay more for each contract renewal.
But they also receive more.
But they receive. So the app governance feature, part of the Cloud Apps suite, allows you to monitor the activity of the OAuth integrated applications. Can be used for shadow IT discovery. One good thing is you can actually look into the Microsoft Graph API usage, which is, I mean, the minute you grant someone, you create an app registration and you give them the client secret and ID, you don't know what's going on afterwards, pretty much. It's
it really depends what kind of access you granted to
Yes.
that, but that's why they recently introduced a lot of changes in terms of how you can consent, because it was, we'll see this in the next session about the defaults.
Yeah, you can do selected consent, but I mean, selected for the different, I mean, for SharePoint, for others, but technically these credentials are still valuable, so they can be used elsewhere if you don't secure them with conditional access. And you having an insight into the actual usage, you can create alerts, and like I noted in the slides, you can act on events. So it's sort of a proactive monitoring of the APIs and basically all of the cloud apps that have access to your data in M365, because this is what it's for. If you have a lot of data in SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, this would be definitely something that you want to implement, since it's already part of V5 security.
Maybe we have to create a separate session about the different licenses, because
yes,
if I have, you know, it's becoming
I can talk
more
about licensing
more and more, and this is very beneficial. I'm sure that licensing is the favorite topic for everybody in our field. So bringing some more lights in it definitely will help people to take informative decision and understand well how much things you have in E5, even not even talking from the corporation perspective, but just from security standpoint.
Yeah,
because
in the cost management session that we did, we focus a lot on the infrastructure side, where things like Advisor and the cost management portal shows us. But if you look at a standard Microsoft contract for services, which include things like the collaboration pieces and the user licenses and the licenses around operating systems and server cows and so forth, you will see that so much money is being wasted just because you're not picking the right things for your organization.
Spending time.
Also, you provision services in advance and you don't use them. You plan to use them and you don't leverage kind of the right mechanism. So a lot of money goes out the window when it comes to but that's true.
I like the Bulgarian.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's definitely worth to have a look at the appropriate licensing, especially from and also a lot of the Defenders it was included in the pipe as well.
Yeah, it's not being used at all.
Yeah,
And you have and you're purchasing things like AirWatch and Mobile Iron and
all other stuff, which
yeah,
yeah,
Endpoint CrowdStrike and
yeah.
okay.
It's, I mean, the list is
Yeah.
never ending.
The last one is on. The last one is something that was announced for the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and it's a way to discover internet exposed services. So if you have workstations or servers, it's a combination of what the endpoint signals provide, as well as the integration with something called RISC-IQ, which is basically a company that was taken over by Microsoft a few years ago. And it's like Shodan and others, where they create a public database of internet exposed services, and they kind of combine the two together to provide an insight of, I mean, if you have so many devices and you have multiple public IP addresses, especially in sites and the remote locations, if you haven't done things correctly, you may not even know that it's that you have exposed services like RDP ports and so forth. This is where attackers usually start. If new vulnerabilities are announced, they would go into a public database like this one, and they will do a query for all of the, let's say, all of the exposed Exchange servers on the internet, or storage accounts based on HTTPS access. And this way you can discover more about the actual organization. This is obviously useful for companies that have tens of thousands of endpoints, but still.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, these vendors like Shodan, they have some premium tiers where you can pay and get additional features, additional for scanning and having better reports.
RISC-IQ was sort of similar. I mean, they had a different approach of kind of gathering the data, but yeah, more or less it provides a structured database of things that are exposed.
Good stuff.
All right.
So I think it's pretty connected, moving from the security to identity. So yep. Moving to today's session is, in the beginning of the year, we had this introduction to the Azure governance. We mentioned multiple times that actually this is what we're trying to achieve here is to provide some kind of combination of the Microsoft best practices, but also our own experience implementing the same. So keep in mind that it's not covering directly in punctuational. Not sure if it's the right word, but I guess not. But it's not covering the formal approach, but it's still it's very close. But and yeah, it's combined with our experience. So we had our first session about the cost management, which you can find in YouTube. Then we moved to security. Actually, the security, both sessions was pretty, how to say, complete, which will provide you, how to say, very, very good fundamental, and not only fundamental to build your governance minimum viable product, if we can say that way. So let's continue with the identity. So as you know, that Microsoft are one of their best strengths, I would say, is their identity services. During the years, they shows that they're the clear leader in that space. I remember the years when Azure AD was not that mature, and actually that was helping Okta to gain some advantages in the past to have functionality to which Azure, it was not presented in Azure AD. However, in the recent years, we don't think that there's a comparison at all. So in general, the identity services provide actually the core mechanism which support the access control in your organization. So it's in nowadays, since in the past the boundary was the physical networking. We had that we had a firewall, and we know that everything after the firewall is secure. We don't care much about it. Everybody was in the office. Our environment was in the office. Our endpoints was in the office in our course. Currently, the boundary actually become identity, and that's the reason why it's so important to pay more attention to it in order to taking care of it, to make it secure. And yeah, that's why we have this session, and it's important part of the Azure governance in general.
And also to mention that Microsoft has been a part of the almost all corporate environments. I mean, at least in the Fortune 500, all of them are using Active Directory for decades now. And it's been something that basically they have so much experience working with identity, and they translated this experience over to Azure AD, and all of the kind of the principles that would apply to a cloud service is also coming from their Active Directory deployment. I mean, everybody's still using Active Directory from one way or another. That's why you have ADDS as an option in the cloud. A lot of the bigger companies are still using hybrid deployments where Active Directory is the authoritative directory for the data. So yeah, I mean, they know how to do identity. That's what I'm saying.
That's completely true. And as I think we've mentioned this multiple times, based on our experience, what we saw is that actually in the unfortunately the biggest challenge for the organization is to taking care of their identity part. So when we see any organization from medium to large size and above, the first thing that we notice is that always there's room for improvement in terms of security. But when you jump in the identity part, it's unfortunately, I don't know, it's maybe underestimated. It's maybe recently, so I can give another example, is the challenges came from much earlier phases in the general cloud adoption. What we saw is that actually the let's say the cloud center of excellence team, or the team which is responsible for the cloud adoption and driving the cloud / digital transformation in the company, is moving so fast, and that actually IAM teams, because the large organization have separate teams which are responsible only for IAM, or / security teams are can get up to that speed, and they I guess that's the reason why we've seen that the identity part of the Azure cloud in the majority of the organization has at least the majority of room for improvement, if I can say that way. But yeah, anyway. So I think we discussed about the role of identity services. We'll go deeper into different options that you can configure. So as I mentioned just a minutes ago, actually identity complements security. It's because right now we have the boundary moved out of our organization. So the new boundary is the identity. Microsoft is, as we discussed previously, put a lot of effort in order to help organization to resolve this kind of challenges that I mentioned of getting up to speed of all teams by implementing the security defaults, which actually helps you to have some kind of MVP in terms of the identity part. Recently, something interesting that I noticed was one organization, large organization, which was established a long time ago, have two separate tenants. The other tenant was much less secure than the new one. Even that the new one was used like from 2% of the organization, and 98% was using the major one, which wasn't that well secured, if I can say that way. So there's a lot of features, important features, which I will go deeper, but things like MFA, different methods of implementing appropriate role-based access control. The newly introduced actually it's not that new, but attribute-based access control, privilege identity management, all of this stuff. Conditional access. We'll discuss this.
And also,
in details.
Yeah, and also the nature of how Azure Active Directory is working, because all of the customers are living basically under the same forest is not the right word, but you can think of them as one giant organization which has different levels of abstraction between the different clients. And that's how they segregate. But having one organization allows them to manage this much more effectively compared to having an on-premise solution and implementing features that are on this scale is the centralized approach in a cloud deployment is much easier for Microsoft to kind of develop. And for many years, Active Directory was a more or less a stagnant service.
Yeah.
Every year with the new version of Windows Server, they would add something. I mean, a new first functional level. Back in 2012 or I think it's Windows Server 2012, we were introduced the ability to actually do recycle bin, to do restore objects. And you can imagine how difficult it was for Microsoft to implement this in an on-premise product. While here, this allows them to be much more flexible.
Yeah. Continuing the discussion. So about the managing identity baseline, as we already mentioned, there's tons of services provided by Microsoft in order to do that. So we have the capability, which is I don't know, one of the very important thing that organizations have been looking in order to adopt the cloud, the ability to be able first to start simple by extending their own data centers to it. Even that we discussed multiple times that this is not the best approach of adopting the cloud. It's still kind of
still happening
step. It's still a kind of good step, like get your hands dirty, play with it, bringing some spinning up some dev test environment. But for example, services like Azure AD Connect are crucial to help you to get there. And also the other features like Azure AD B2B and B2C
Yeah, this is something that was not technically possible with Azure with Active Directory. I mean, you technically could do federations, or you could do trusts between forests, but not in the seamless way without actually connecting two businesses together. Here you have the ability to fine tune and only share the information you need, and all of the underlying components are managed by Microsoft. So all of the, especially for the Azure B2B, this feature is really could be a hot seller for anyone going to the cloud, especially if if you plan to kind of expand your business, have multiple partners, and share information seamlessly with single sign-on. For B2C, it allows you to connect and use your own identity management system, or maybe a social network. This is very common for websites. If they want to integrate existing services, and you spin up an app service plan, or a web app, and you connect it over with a B2C implementation. I mean, really where this excels is the time to market. What steps do you need to take in order for quickly to share your information or start collaborating with someone? And previously you needed to purchase third-party products, do a lot of back and forth communication with your partners, but now it's just a matter of sending them a link usually. And if they're already a Microsoft customer, which most are, you'll have seamless integration. This is where really the cloud shines as an alternative to an on-premise environment.
And also to put another side together with as you say, productivity and saving time of not taking care of complex stuff. It's the complex things brings much more brings much more chances of mistakes, if I can say that way. It brings much more how to say, places where you can be let's say compromised, etc. So it's also help to enhance your security, having simple solution which is managed by Microsoft and not from you. For example, in the past, if I remember correctly, as you said, these federations, etc., was very popular, but currently it's hard for me to find a reason to use it. It should be some very, very isolated use case.
Legacy apps.
Very
tied to Kerberos.
Very legacy apps, let's say that way. So yeah. So I think we discussed a bit this part in the previous section. So that's the reason. That's confirmed second time that actually identity complements security, and they're moving hands by hand. But having the appropriate control of and managing the access of your user, it's crucial in order to managing your risk and lower the probability of your environment and your identities to be hacked. That's the reason why you have so much tools, which we'll cover in some of the next slides, where you can you can maintain your signings, you can have reports, you can configure automated actions, etc., etc. So the four main areas in the formal Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework are Azure Active Directory configuration, so administrative access of your users, the access of your business users to your identity, and actually the application access. So starting with Azure AD, as we mentioned multiple times, it's we can consider it as a single source of truth, even as just before the session started. Nikki Panchev mentioned that that could, of course, not be the case. But what I've seen is that even that organization which are using the other clouds are leveraging Azure AD as their main identity provider. And yeah, I think because of what we already discussed, this simplifying way of consuming, let's say, all of the services that Azure AD provided. So I think it has endless integration at the moment with third-party applications.
Yeah, and the other thing that would point you to doing this is the ability to implement security controls which are not available to or not supported by the specific services. So if you have SaaS services or third-party cloud, other clouds like AWS, you still want to have a unified approach to how you're accessing them, and you can use your Azure AD identities along with conditional access, implement the same set of policies, and these will be applicable not only through the native services like the collaboration tools or the infrastructure, but they will be applicable to maybe using an application gateway. You can connect your on-premise application and have Azure AD authenticate the Azure's AD authentication authorization mechanisms to secure this application on that level. And you wouldn't worry how the actual app stores its user accounts, where it stores them, secure its database, because technically Azure AD is managing this for you.
So it's bringing new life for the legacy application. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So also, of course, in order to follow the best practices, you should take care of auditing of the Azure AD. So all the logs, you have multiple options how to control and store the logs, how to relay on them, how to be notified on them. But it's definitely important to take care and most important to not only store them, but leverage them and use them in order to identify as early as possible any signals that may that will, you should that should trigger your attention. Microsoft, by the way, with their different AI investments and services behind the scene, are how to say, have this kind of behavior analytics and analyze them, so you can take the advantages of this. We can configure also these things exported to CMs like Splunk, etc. But of course, it really depends what are the current investment of your organizations are.
And you also have so many different ways of getting to these logs. You have the management API with the logs are being streamed. You can use Graph to fetch these and move them over to separate places. Log analytics would be another way to store them.
Keep in mind, be very careful with log analytics, because usually becoming the most expensive thing in your cloud environment.
I mean,
so it's what we've implemented recently was having so actually storing the logs in 3 different places. So in the Event Hub, we store the logs for Splunk. Work analytics workspace was for shorter time if you want to have a look at the logs, and for long time archive retention for in order to be compliant with among the standards. We store them in the storage account.
Archive storage.
Yeah, but I think you can't get directly to archive. But yeah,
you have
kind
to
of.
use it.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
definitely the cheaper one.
You also have another ability to use with E5. You have an add-on that can actually store all of your logs for 1 year. I mean, this is more related to the
M365.
yes, M365
It was free for 1 year. Still, I can't recall. It was for Sentinel stuff. I just can't.
So it's in Azure AD, the logs are being stored for 30 days. In the general E3 license allows you to store the logs for 90 days, the E5
Okay.
for 1 year. And this also captures all the logs for Azure AD sign-in. So
Nice.
you don't have to go into Azure AD to actually see this. Using the compliance portal, you have the unified audit log feature where you can use PowerShell or Graph or the UI to get it. And on top of that, you have an add-on you can purchase, which allows you to store all of the individual logs there. These are all of the user-generated events. These are based on users because you assign the add-on to a user account, and it will store them for 10 years.
Okay.
And then they're completely managed by Microsoft. You don't have to do this back and forth process like log analytics. You wouldn't use Sentinel to store long-term logs anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So another topic which I've seen that we have a guest who can even provide some example of it, how important is this, but as we discussed previously, a lot of clients did not pay enough attention to strictly, how to say, configure the very baseline of their environment. So it's one of the things is this default user permission. So really pay attention of what is the default behavior, because usually I don't think that you would like each user to be able to register application in your tenant, especially if you're a large enterprise. There's even, as I said, there's some nice changes in the consent way of providing consent to the administrative consent to the new application. But it's, yeah,
these are so general. I mean, these are so tenant level that this is probably the first thing that you need to set.
That's the strange thing, right? You should definitely have a look at.
And they're also part of the baseline setup as well.
And also, I like the option that you can connect your account to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You can bookmark this and create like
on the collaboration Azure AD settings for external identities. You also have multiple things that you need to define. Are you allowing guests
for guest account?
Yeah, guests to be added into groups, or to other guests to invite further guests into information.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Guest to invite guests is one of the favorite.
Most tenant collaboration features as well. So there are so many things that need to be defined, but they also affect the way services work. So you need to be sure. Sometimes it's not that well apparent what you're setting up in Azure AD will conflict with maybe how Microsoft Teams is set up.
Yeah. Oh, that's important part. But with all of these abilities that we discussed, it's coming also the responsibility.
Yeah.
And even that Microsoft is doing their best by, for example, implementing these security defaults. It's still your responsibility to take care of that part.
Yeah.
So password manager, password management. This is another topic which, by the way, I had a lot of discussion, especially for the how it's possible to have the password set to never expire, and how it's possible to be the better way of maintaining stronger identity.
This was actually a NIST recommendation from one of the last few reports that they got.
I think it was like 5 years or
Five?
something.
Is it 5 now?
3 or 5, something
Yeah,
like.
they said you don't longer need to kind of rotate your passwords for every 90 days, every 30 days. It will be much better to implement a zero trust model. Have passwords non-expire, but implement multi-factor authentication or go passwordless altogether, because this is probably one of the.
However, it's really important to remember that we're talking about passwords used by humans. And the reason that this is recommendation is because humans,
they tend to
add
a symbol to
simplify their own password management for keys and all of the access keys. It's definitely recommended to have short expiry cycle. So don't take the
vault or something.
Yes, don't take non-expiring passwords. Like, by the way, that's one of the reasons why they put limitation. I remember in the past it was 2099 years the secrets expiry date for the applications. So right now I think the maximum is 2 years, which is it doesn't show much responsibility if you're following this model, I would say. But yeah.
And in the self-service password reset portal, a typical implementation would be to have an Azure AD Connect server, on-premise AD. You don't want to use the on-premise AD feature to reset passwords. You want to leverage what Azure AD can do for you, and that's why you have to do password tryback, which means you are allowing your Azure AD to make changes to your passwords on premises. But this way, you have a more centralized control to your management. Now, this also entails that you have to have a constant non-disruptive connection between the two organizations, because otherwise people will not be able to reset their passwords. Putting hashes of passwords in the cloud is also something that you can do, especially if you want to have an understanding of how your passwords match up to exposed passwords on the internet. That was something that we could have done. I mean, 5-6 years ago, this would have taken at least 2 pieces of software to at least export the hashes to a file, analyze them somewhere, or pay a company to match this up. Now, I'm more trusting Microsoft from this perspective. So yeah, I think all of these features allow you to take over the control from on-premise AD, which is more or less has the way it's doing security is usually not by a zero trust model. So this would be a better approach.
Yeah, and just before the meeting, we discussed that there will be some changes in the self-service password reset and legacy MFA combination to converge identity. If I'm not mistaken, I just saw the news that it's becoming generally available, and actually it would be forced next year. So yeah, a lot of things that you have to pay attention to that. And also, just before the session, we discussed why it's important to not syncing your enterprise administrator on-prem to the Azure cloud. So okay, so the access for your administrative team. Again, you can, as you see on the how to say, the figure, we have kind of layered defense. So again, which shows us the importance of taking care of different levels, layers, and abilities that we have in order to control that. So we discussed how important is to have things like conditional access in place. And by the way, in the recent years, conditional access just and its ability explodes, but let's save the discussion for the next slide. It's really important to have a break glass account for your Azure cloud environment. Usually the recommendation is to build 2 of them, and you can find by searching in internet that Microsoft have very nice article of how to establish and managing this break glass account. Also, it's simple. Another recommendation would be to limit the amount of global admins, but of course more than 1, so the minimum should be 2. In the past, there were very nice example from Microsoft that they were having like 5 global admins in the entire organization. And I've seen
entire.
Yes, and I've seen a lot of organization with significant amount of global admins, and
more than 5.
A lot of examples of small organization where like global admin is the like how to say it, the default role, which is granted to everybody. So keep in mind this is not a good practice. And for our friends which are just getting up to speed with Azure, keep in mind with global admin, you have full access not only to Azure, but also to all Microsoft products, and also you can gather access to all Azure resources. You can give yourself like owner access to each of the subscription management groups, and actually you can do whatever you would like to do with your environment. So definitely 2 to up to 3, depending on the size of the organization. And yeah, it's so the role of break glass account coming more with actually with with the conditional access implementations, because when you plan to implement conditional access, you should be very careful.
So you don't lock yourself out.
Yeah, we have a friend which recently shared with us that they had a lot of challenges experimenting with conditional access, and they've been able to lock out almost the entire organization, which you can imagine how, especially if you have global organization, but not only, what is the impact to it. So that's the reason why before touching this feature, you should make sure that you follow pretty good best practices of having break glass account.
And exemption from the standard policy for these accounts.
Yeah.
Because otherwise even that will not be sufficient.
Yes, I've heard that Microsoft can help, but my advice would be that Microsoft can help if you're not small company, or at least you have bigger chances. But if you're a small company,
you don't want to be doing this in the middle of a crisis.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, another I would say feature which I love is privilege identity management. It's providing it's coming with P2, so which could be called E5, which could be called E5, and this feature is actually pretty nice addition. In the past, there were a lot of third-party organization which which is doing similar stuff. So controlling the
elevated access.
Yeah, elevated access and elevated administrative access coming from the on-prem world. As some of you may know, my colleague Nick Panchev was responsible for a large implementation of CyberArk. It was great too. And right now, not right now, but in the past few or even, I think, few years. We have privilege identity management, which can help you to not always work with your major, your high privilege access account, but just with your regular account. And then when you need to do some administrative stuff, you can elevate your role. You can elevate it for specific amount of time. You can provide a reason why you need that, and you can configure approval. This can help you reduce the amount of account that you manage, because it is very popular to have multiple accounts that you're using. And again, we can go back to this password stuff, and password never expire, how much that this brings additional effort in order for the end users, administrative user, to manage all of these and remember all the passwords, make sure that they don't forget them. There is a way to restore them. So all of this stuff, just to recall about the break glass, it's good to have a policy in place in your organization where you, let's say at least one per year, you use it and do some, make sure that everything is working fine.
Sort of a DR test.
It's like a DR test on, VC DR test. It's continuity test for your organization from identity disaster perspective, right? So yeah, and last but not least, recently they've been added conditional access, which is in preview for the privilege identity management, which is again pretty nice feature. So for example, I'm working with my regular account, and when I have to elevate it, I have to be in the office in order to be able to do that. So it's pretty good addition. Okay, so moving forward. So again, we discussed about our break-glass account tests.
The Microsoft Secure Score portal that we have on the slide allows you to assess your security controls based with the baseline that Microsoft has. Previously, this was a feature in M365, and that got brought over to across more services within Azure. Yeah, it's important to understand how many admins you have overall. And one other point is the regular access reviews, because
that was very hard in the past. It wasn't in place.
I mean, many organizations don't do regular access reviews just because of the sheer number of effort that this requires.
Number of effort is very nice word.
The sheer effort, it's just, it's so, especially if you have multiple segregation in terms of how you're getting to the data, owners versus
that's an important part of owners. So all of these, even in the previous part where we discussed the PIM stuff, all of these features allows your, let's say, central team to distribute this responsibility over the team. So for example, with PIM, you can have different approvals based on the products that they are maintaining. In terms of access reviews, you can have, you can shift the responsibility and distribute it across the product teams.
And it's an automated process. People receive an email, they would go somewhere, approve it, review it. But it's kind of limited to some extent because of the scope of how permissions can be assigned. I mean, if you're doing this on a more native level, like a M365 group or a regular cloud group, yes. But if your data is more separated within containers, like separate services, this becomes more of a burden. But yeah, it's a step forward at least.
Yeah. So moving to the third part, which is business users access governance. So as we discussed previously, that Azure AD provides a lot of functionality in terms of bringing good collaboration between the businesses, and
Mhm.
actually which of course bring the importance of to maintain business users access and how they will access the environment. So things like again, conditional access are one of the very first stuff which you can use, because for example, with conditional access you can have pretty good management of the guest users as well. So you can directly specify different conditional policies for the guest users by even that you're not how to say it's their main IDP. At the end, if they going to use your environment, you're able to make sure that they following your established standards.
Also, you by default you are allowing remote access to your organization, because technically everything is remote in Azure AD. There's nothing. Everything is zero trust, so everybody is being inspected.
Yeah.
And it's not automatically authorized just because let's say they go through the VPN or something. So that's why the identity protection part and using AI generated, or not AI generated, but AI inspected or machine learning capabilities to figure out, is this a risky user or a risky sign-in based on different attributes of the connection. And this is for every single connection that's being made. Imagine how much signals and how much data is being compiled and processed in real time. So the mechanisms that are in place in Azure AD allows you to be much better in isolating users in case of breach compared to what we had previously.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So before diving in this part of how to appropriate managing business users, and we already mentioned some mechanism, I think it's a good time to discuss how important is to make sure you have the number of tenants that you need, which usually is one. I've seen a lot of I mean, I guess it's because of this, on-prem mindset, but I've seen ridiculous examples of organizations. Recently, I saw an example where organization created 3 different tenants for their test, dev, and production environment.
Yeah.
For very small application. And this thing, it's totally ruined the identity and security in 99.9% of the cases. And also it's very costly, because usually all of these licenses that we are discussing, they're tenant-based. So for example, if you have E5 for one of the tenants, you can go and use it in another. If you have Visual subscription, Visual Studio subscription, it's for specific tenant. I also saw this situation where people want to use their Visual Studio subscription. They have like thousands of developers, but unfortunately someone created this in the wrong tenant, where they don't have any Azure.
Yeah, the management becomes a nightmare unless you...
Absolutely, and very expensive, very costly, and at the end it brings a lot of complexity.
Unless you automate everything, every part of it from the start. I mean, landing zone with...
Which usually is not the case, because if you have the ability to automate it, you have the knowledge that in most cases you don't need it at all. And you can confirm that, because I know that you've been leading a lot of acquisition, but usually the most popular and common case where you have multiple tenants in when multiple acquisition, and actually from first place how easy it is to merge tenants, migrate tenants, especially with large
or coexist into tenants at the same time. It becomes a challenge. There are probably a number of scenarios where you would need multi-tenant. I mean, back in the day, we used to have a thing called a resource forest, where you would maybe create your resources like Exchange and
Yeah.
other services, and you will have a separate force that will do identities.
Also, there's these high trust environments
Yeah.
where require totally
But
separate tenant.
95% of the time, you probably don't need this.
No.
I mean, there's so many ways to kind of separate the individual pieces on the tenant level.
And just to be clear, you can have separate dev test tenant, which you can use for
But it's for a different purpose.
experimenting. For example, it's a good way to start with conditional access.
And even that's not even required. I mean, technically.
Yeah, it's not if you, but it's okay if you don't. It's pure dev test tenant where you don't have.
If you're testing tenant settings or something.
Like conditional access, you
Yeah.
can start with it. Create few users, some kind of simple application. You want to make sure that you're taking the right stuff. We want to practice how to control your blast, etc. But if you can use your Visual Studio account and to create whatever number of Azure AD tenants you would like. So yeah. So also another good practice is I've seen people still continue granting access to individuals, not to security groups. So please do not do that. Even that the user is disabled centrally, etc., etc. It's much easier to remove it from specific group than finding where this user have access and clean your environment. Remember that simplicity is improving security. So when you have complex stuff with a lot of moving parts, you have a bigger exposure. There's some nice feature of this self-service group management, dynamic groups. We already discussed the periodical access reviews of the group membership and how you can offload this to your product teams. You should avoid mail-enabled security groups. And yeah, also you may have inactive accounts reviews. So what else in that section? I think we cover pretty much of it. Auditing business user access, there is no much difference of the methods that you can do that. I think we already discussed this part. And application access governance, I think Panchev can share more about it. It's
yeah, I think we've touched on it previously with the even with the app governance feature that we have.
Exactly.
5.
Yep.
Basically, you're trying to secure applications on the actual application level, not just only on the identity, focusing on identities. But and I think on all of these sessions we will recognize different methods of managing this process, the different features that we have as far as Azure goals, the Azure AD integrated ones, the application gateways, application it escapes me. Ways to basically get the application published from on-premises to the cloud.
Proxy.
Yeah, application proxy that I was thinking about. Yeah, the application proxy. Also, the use of service principals.
Yeah, it's this is touching again our favorite topic about managed identities. So when you can't use managed identities, which of course is always the preferred way, you can always use service principals.
Yeah. don't ever use credentials stored in the app code
which
to authenticate.
Which never expired.
Yeah, which never expire, and they have full access to the database, maybe.
Yeah, I think we touched the least privilege approach in the previous session. And auditing the application access governance. Actually, if we are using the managed identity service principal, we still have the options to use Azure Activity Walks to review all the activities for managed identities and service principal. As I mentioned, it's these walks, as we discussed, they can be exported in multiple ways. So just a quick example, if you, we did not have session about the landing zone, but if you remember, you have different management group there, part of the platform. So you can forward these walks to the security team, and you can forward walks related to applications to the respective application teams. But usually what is suggested, it's best practices from Microsoft is to forward the walks to the security team, some kind of CM.
If you're using Sentinel, this would be even much better
because
integrated.
It's also SOAR.
Yeah, you can trigger events. You can act on the different
you can
alerts.
Have very, how to say, automated and optimized security operations center. And yeah, that's all for today. So any questions? You can raise your hand or type in the chat.
Okay.
So I see one question coming from Fadi. So yeah, Fadi, it's regarding the multiple tenants. I think if you have a lot of organizations, large organization which occurring small organizations, it's important to you already have some kind of maturity in the identity field, so that's the biggest reason when you may have multiple tenants. And Tinky Panchev may create a separate session to explain how hard it is to merge tenants. And actually, I think you may also have experience in that. Right?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you
next time.
Yeah, next session would be about the resource consistency, and it will be announced soon. Thanks. Thank you again. Bye.